And I all of you to the second day sessions of the 2-week online refresher course, Holistic Empowerment for Stress Management, a multidisciplinary approach integrating literature, art, social sciences, and medicine, being organized by Atma Sanatan Dharma College in collaboration with MMTTP Ramanujan College under the aegis of University Grants Commission. Now, after listening to our esteemed scholars, we have understood that stress is for real. All of us get affected by it. Buddha too mentioned, sansar dukh hai, dukh hi satya hai. Poets have addressed this fact of life in different ways. And if I have to read out a few lines from Shelley's Ode to the Skylark, I would remind that we keep looking before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is wrought. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. So some of the most beautiful and moving pieces of art and literature, including songs and stories, they are born from the depths of human suffering and sorrow. And the thought is that, creative expressions often arise from the human experience of pain and loss. And poets, with all their sensibility and sentiments, they try to turn this pain and sorrow into something more transformative and more beautiful and more meaningful. Now, something like this must have happened with Keats when, and all of us are aware of the context, in which Keats wrote his very famous Ode to the Nightingale, and where he burst into expressions talking about the pain and the sufferings of the hungry generations of mankind. And he even asked the nightingale to get faded far away, to go fade and far away, dissolve and quite forget. What thou among the leaves has never known, the weariness, the fever and the fret, here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and laden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pineth them beyond tomorrow. Now, poetry, with its power to capture raw emotions, provides solace in times of hardship, serving as a kind of therapy for both the writer and the reader. Through the art of poetry, individuals have found healing and resilience in the face of adversity. Since times immemorial, poetry has been documenting the pain of the suffering humanity and has also given them words of comfort and helped them build communities and individual lives. I'm reminded of Robert Frost's famous definition of poetry, where he says, a poem begins with a lump in the throat, a homesickness, or a love sickness. It's a reaching out towards expression. Sorry. An effort to find fulfillment. A complete poem is one where an emotion has found its thought and the thought has found words. Poetic forms, therefore, are always seen as a dialogue. Poetry is never seen as a finished product because it continues to be a process of self-discovery and growth. The beauty of poetry lies in its ability to evolve and adapt, reflecting the ever-changing nature of human experience. While Western schools of poetry have generally adhered to the notion of art for art's sake, Indian poetic traditions have long believed in its cultural, psychological, social, and spiritual regenerative powers. I hereby quote Acharya Mambat from his treatise Kavya Prakash. Kavyam yashase arthikrite vyavahar vide shiveta rakshate. Poetry is to be held in high esteem for facilitating self-awareness and the propagation of values like Satya, Shiv, and Sundar, truth, benevolence, and beauty. Whether it's the Vedic era mantras and chantings, Bhakti Sufi poetry, or confessional autobiographical forms of poetry in the modern world, poetry has always aided the cultivation of a sense of self-belief, mitigation of pain, and realization of inner consciousness towards self-healing. Besides being pleasurable, poetry contributes to intellectual expansion, chitta vistar, or lokottara, attainment of supreme bliss. Presently, poetry therapy is being practiced and applied all throughout the world, especially the European countries, in hospitals and healing centers and places where children, adolescents, the elderly, the lonely, the grieving, victims of rape, domestic violence, dementia, post-traumatic stress disorder, history of abuse, people with serious medical conditions such as cancer or other mental health concerns, they have also found considerable help from poetic practices. So you can say that poetry has helped people realign themselves, recenter themselves, and has also been very helpful in bringing an inward revolution. To talk more about the cathartic effects of poetry on human mind and the coping mechanism it provides, we have with us today Professor Jaydeep Sarangi, famously referred to as the bard on the banks of Dullum. He's an Indian poet, poetry activist with 11 poetry collections in English, latest being The Half Confession in 2024. A renowned scholar on Dalit studies, post-colonial studies, and Indian writings, with 41 books anchored in Kolkata, Jhargram, and regular columns and book reviews featuring in major newspapers, he's a leading intellectual. Widely anthologized and reviewed as a significant contemporary poet, Professor Sarangi is on the editorial boards for journals of repute devoted to marginal studies and poetry criticism. With Rob Harley, he has edited 6 anthologies of poems from Australia and India, which are a wealthy literary link between the nations. With Amelia Walker, he has guest edited a special issue for Text, Australia. He has 20 books and several articles, essays, reviews on Dalit studies, which are a window to the world. His recent article, The Sociological Self as Palimpsest Caste, Class, Religion, and Gender in the Select Writings of Bama, appeared through Routledge, UK. His recent books include Mapping the Mind, Minding the Map, 20 Contemporary Indian English Poets, Sahitya Academy, A Life Uprooted, A Bengali Dalit Refugee Remembers, Sahitya Academy. Honored with the Ram Mohan Award, Professor Sarangi is currently the President of Guild of Indian English Writers, Editors and Critics, and Vice President EC Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, Kolkata. Living with Poets and Poetry, Professor Sarangi is Principal of New Alipore College, Kolkata. As a cultural critic and as an individual entrusted with the anthologizing of the poetic voices of his time, poetry appears to be his primary focus and passion, which he approaches with a dispassionate and honest demeanor. Over to you, Professor Sarangi, whenever you are ready.
Thank you so much, Shubha, for this wonderful introduction and map making of poetry and your related poetry with very important parameters and contexts. I thank ARSD College and Ramanujan College, New Delhi, for organizing it, and wonderful participants. Hopefully we'll be interacting and we'll be following up with a discussion. Now, the first part of my talk will be, I'll be beginning with Federico Garcia Lorca, a 20th century Spanish poet. According to Lorca, I quote, "Set in place the lovers who will afterwards be photographs. It will resonate forever. I sing your restless longing for the statue, your fear of the feelings that await you in the street. I sing the small sea siren who sings to you, riding her bicycle of corals and conches. But above all, I sing a common thought that joins us in the dark and golden hours. The light that blinds our eyes is not earth. Rather, it is love, friendship, crossroad, swords. Reading literature can be an effective way to reduce stress as a teacher, as a researcher, or as an academic administrator. Studies have shown that engaging with a book with literary merits can lower heart rate, ease muscle tension, and shift focus away from anxious daily thoughts, effectively providing a mental escape from the daily stresses. Reading can even go to the extent of relaxation, relaxing the body by lowering the heartbeat and easing the tension in the muscle. A study at the University of Sussex in 2009 found that reading can reduce stress by up to 68%. By reading, I mean reading for fun. Researchers at the New School in New York City have found evidence that literary productions, mainly poetry, improves a reader's capacity to understand what others are thinking and feeling. A similar study strongly recommends the connection between reading poetry and performance in the world and building up empathy and social competence. We are all better off when we understand each other through emotions. I know in today's world, the crisis is of emotional intelligence. We are taught to be socially competent. We are taught to be linguistically competent. We are taught to be theorizing and be an expert of theory. But how many of us really take care of emotional intelligence, which is the key for every relations, role relations, even the performance and our ability to bring people in our catchment area through the approach of like this. It gives us an opportunity to identify with others in similar circumstances. Very importantly, Shobha ma'am was referring to some of the iconic poems by John Keats, and the similar circumstances, if we can approximate, we enrich ourselves. When we read about others with similar experiences, we can feel less alone. I think in today's world, this is a very key sentence, especially for youth, old people facing challenges of loneliness. There are now more of this sort of things, more young and adult reading and rereading poetry are building up the nation and the world as a village to a better height. What I want to mean is that what Adrian Rich says, words are purposes, the words are maps. Wonderful images that we get are the words of purposes, and the words are maps, maps which are imprinted in our mind. Diving into the wreck, poems 1971 to 72, Rich said that. We get use filling words. As we say, we try to talk about our history, but the filling words just don't feel right. They don't fit in. They don't fit in to express the traumatic experiences which are bigger than life. Our heart are filled with electricity when we think of poetry and we feel the pulse of poetry. Unfilling words can feel too small to hold those big emotions: sadness, anger, rage, terror, and many, many others. So these feelings, I think, are very important feelings for building up emotional intelligence. And if we are emotionally intelligent as a teacher, as a professor, as an administrator, I think we can give service in a large scale. In today's discussion, I'll be focusing poetry because if we take up a lot of other things, we'll be jumbled up. But my concentration will be on the wellness and development of wellness through poetry. Now, let me begin with a submission. The submission is that Indian English poetry is possibly going through its most visible, quote unquote, visible and the vibrant phases today. Why do I claim it? Whether Indian English writing began in any part of India, and it took some generations to solidify the taking up, shaping appropriate idioms, contexts, metaphors, concepts, and cadences for perfecting it to the level of perfection and through poetry. I think poetry is something very difficult to embrace if the language comes as a third language or the second language, or now for many of Indians, our first language is English. With 3-4 generations of English studies on the back, I think now Indian poetry in English is really sounding as musical as the nightingales referred to in John Keats's poem, as well as in the introduction by Shobha ma'am. My point is here, the crow noises, a very important symbol for me, are more musical than nightingales or thrushes chanting these days. From being an unsure, questionable, and apologetic genre under colonial rule to evolving a distinct idiom, identity, and a place for itself within global readership, Indian poetry in English today has effectively vernacularized the English language and subtly anglicized the country's power of bhashas or vernaculars. I think this is the miracle. And by this miracle, I'll be concentrating only on poetry in English. But the strength of our country is always our vernaculars. And the democratization of English through our different cultural variants, cultural nuances. I think this has played an important role in expression through English and linking up as a parameter or as an index to read the mind and reflecting the mind for others. Through the osmotic cultural diversity, Indian English poetry has emerged as a sublime face for the world. I'm a very proud tribe belonging to this. The linguistic plurality and the polyphony of imagination are help, not hindrance for us. India is such a country rich with myth, legend, history, and bhashas which are unique to the world. And through this uniqueness, I think Indian English poetry is shining like anything these days. What I really stress on this particular point is that I'll be referring to you, I'll be recommending you to read some of the very important poets writing their soul out, reaching out to others' mental spaces, and which are so soothing, calming, and are almost like verse therapy in our day-to-day life. The anxiety of Indianness, my next point is, there was a time in 60s, 70s, early part of 19th and 20th century, there was an anxiety to express Indianness. But we remember the article written by Professor Meenakshi Mukherjee, and that an anxiety of Indianness, I think, is over, and the scope is huge, unbound, and guaranteed. In thematic terms, the Indian English poetry, the range of Indian English poetry is exhaustive, with plays, history, mythology, ecology, identity, humanism, and, different kind of situations of life, survival, depression, and emancipation, wellness, the last word, wellness, and what more. It has become the destination for poetry written in English in different cultures. Now, again, I refer to the bird I began with, crow, and my love affair with the crow bird, because not just as a juxtaposition of a white bird called dove, but crow is a very local bird, and there are so many poets written on crow bird in India. Now, in this point, my objective is to show the singing or the crow noises are sweeter than the dove singing. The democratization has blurred pocket centralism in English poetry in India. Now, what is pocket centralism? If we think of Indian English poetry, it began and concentrated mostly on in Mumbai and even in Maharashtra. Like cricket, Indian cricket team. Most of the captains in 60s, 70s, they came from Maharashtra. And similarly, Indian English poetry, who was the headquarter pocket, was under the great leadership of none other than Nassim Ezekiel. English poetry is a pan-Indian affair now, but those days are gone. Now, Indian English poetry is free from any particular pocket like Indian cricket team. It covers wide range of perspectives and gauges from different cultural spaces. Very important point that Indians can write. What Indians can write, nobody in the world can ever write. Because the kind of history we have, the kind of sociological spaces we inherit, the kind of legacy, mythologies, allusions, cultural variations that we bring into the world, I think this is unique for any other country. It is impossible for other countries. For monolinguals, very impossible to write what the way Indians write in these days, covering wide perspectives and gauges from different cultural spaces, looking the world from different cultural spaces, and involving themselves into the matter. When the intellect is involved, mind is also attached to the land and poetry and the part of the culture. Suppose someone is looking and reading a perspective from the northeastern point of view, or someone is looking into from the perspective of Uttarakhand, someone is from Rajasthan, someone is from Andaman Nicobar Island, or someone is from Kerala or from eastern part of India. We are so, and I think multifaceted. We bring multifaceted gauges to literary studies, which are a very good, I think, bonus for us, because when the mind is topsy-turvy, I think reading something of so much provocative, something so provocative, I think that helps. Next important facet about contemporary Indian English poetry, by contemporary, I mean writing in last 20 years or 25 years time, the sparkling images and symbols. You know, India had history, India had the mythology, the legends, everything. What in poetry was missing before, the application of images and symbols in an effective way, most effective way. I think now it's in last 20, 25 years time, what we see is the sparkling images and symbols used in Indian English poetry and which are directly related to emotions, stresses, well-being, which will engage us intellectually as well as emotionally. And when someone can connect emotionally, I think that is the best space where mental healing or wellness is a possibility. Now, another point of Indian English poetry, it brings into the world a new style. And the style I will talk about, 4 or 5 styles that are very prevalent in Indian English poetry, which are very important to look at poetry in general. And I think that's why I claim at the very beginning, this is the healthiest time for Indian English poetry in the global scenario. And the words from the vernaculars are resources. This is one of the very important pillars of building up the big mansion, big building that is of Indian English poetry, and that is through the vernacular phrases, expressions taken from the vernaculars, and it shows how flexible is Indian poetry in English, how flexible is Indian English, and we may have reservation about the term Indian English, but of course, our ways of identity we can think of in that line. Now, I refer to the world scenario and compare it with the Indian English poetry. And if we look into the very world poetry scenario in last 60, 65 years and compare it Indian poetry, Indian poets are very knowledge gatherers, I'll say. Many of them are the professors of English taught in universities in the English subject or different other subjects. They were voracious readers. Latin American poets intervened into their consciousness automatically. That's very important facet about Indian English poetry. Like Nicanor Parrar. Nicanor Parrar had become only one very important influence on Indian English poetry. And if you Google or look into my interviews with Jayanta Mahapatra and many Indian English poets, they all comment that that Latin American poets, but translated into English, or those who could access in Spanish mainly, and those poets made them as poets. So these are very important impact on Indian English poetry, like Nicanor Parrar. We all know the big name like Quasimodo, Garcia Lorca, Federico Garcia Lorca. I have already mentioned Ceferis, the diplomat poet, and why not? Very important, prominent Chilean diplomat poet, none other than Pablo Neruda, who made poetry as the form of within the veins, blood, flesh, and everything. Octavia Paz. What I want to say here is that that the Indian English poets grew up with the traditions and following up with the social, cultural point of views of world poets and made their own idiom very distinct. As Shubha ma'am already mentioned, one of my recent books through Sahitya Academy, that is also, of course, with Vasudhara Roy, That is an anthology of poetry of 20 iconic Indian English poets, and each poet has contributed 10 their selected poems. They have, suppose, after immediately when the book was in process, Jayantada died. After that, Keki died. But what we got is that they selected 10 poems, gave us, and we published through Sahitya Academy, mapping the mind, minding the map. So in these 20, what we wanted to plan is that to showcase what is the magic in poetry in India and to the world around. And the 20 poets that we selected, but one, I must humbly say that this is not definite, and this is, we never claim it as the ultimate. And we know there are so many anthologies around and so many very good anthologies to look at. The poets we covered: Adil Jusawala, Anita Nahal, Arundhati Subramaniam, Ashwini Kumar, Bashabi Fraser, Bibhu Padhi, Jayanta Mahapatra, Tabish Kher, Usha Akela, Yogesh Patel, K. Sachidanandan, K. Srilata, K. M. Darwala, Lakshmi Kannan, Mamang Dai, Nabina Dash, Ravines Angam, Shangjukta Dashgupta, Smita Agarwal, and Sudeep Sen. I again humbly say this is only a part of the anthology. Hopefully, another anthology and 2 more anthologies can complete the list. Now, I'll talk about some dimensions to look at. Arundhati Subramaniam. Arundhati Subramaniam is the author of more than 15 books of poetry, prose, and most recently a volume called Love Without a Story. And I think this came out in 2019. Now, why do I refer to this particular book? I'll refer to 2 poems by Arundhati Subramaniam, and I want to share with you how much we have progressed towards freedom of expression. By freedom of expression means making our own nation, own language, making in English language as my own language. The poem called Mitti, M-I-T-T-I, Mitti, all reminders of the anthem of Mak, of which we are met, except when June clouds capsize over an Arabian sea and a sleeping city awakens to an ik so singular. After some lines, and a stop of matter meets the slick lunatic wetness, mitti. Just that, nothing else will do. Another Arundhati Subramaniam's poem we can refer to. I was 8 when I looked through a keyhole and saw my mother in the drawing room in her hibiscus silk sari, her fingers slender around a glass of iced cola, and I grew suddenly shy for never having seen her before. We read and reread, and we become journeymen towards the wellness of heart. Now, here we can really think of the power of writing that we are receiving. Indian English poetry is at its best when it delves into the myths of the land and its people. I know all of us have our strongholds, like, of course, Pablo Neruda. And those who we all live with Pablo Neruda, almost live means reading Pablo Neruda every day. What is the best part of Pablo Neruda is when Neruda explains and describes the ruins of civilization. I think nobody in the world can ever describe the ruins of civilization so powerfully, so elegantly, and so musically, like Pablo Neruda. Similarly, when we talk of Jayanta Mahapatra, the best part of Jayanta Mahapatra is when he describes his loneliness and his relationship with the world around him. That is the culture around him. That's why in many times Jayanta Mahapatra's local is so important. Our poets are blessed to have numerous cultures, languages, myths as their baggage. They are never bored with one culture, one language, and they never bore the audience at all. And Indian English poetry is the explorations of Indian myths. With her rich Tamil roots and her vibrant links with other Indian cultures, Lakshmi Kannan breathes a confluence of histories and traditions through an idiom that is her own. Another poet that I'm referring for, I'm trying to cover the scenario of India is very difficult because it's such a huge country. It's very difficult to present. Whatever we present partially. Now, her latest poetry collection that I reviewed for the Statesman, Nadi Stuti. Nadi Stuti. We understand, as we are born in India, brought up in India, Nadi Stuti is so important in the making of India. Making of India. And we all know in different parts of India, Nadi Stuti, because it's a praise or oracle of the river, praise for the river, addressed to the river. And of the rivers and for the rivers flowing deep our heart. Here the poet uses rivers of India as metaphors for women's lives and their bodies. Rivers change from dry to full in seasons like a female body. Lakshmi Kannan, rooted in the myths of India, describes the Indus referring to significant deities, Parvati, Meenakshi, Rama, and all. Her poem Snake Woman explores the Indian cult of Naga Puja. Naga means snake, worship of snake. In order to please the snakes, Indian secret scriptures are replete with the references to snakes and snake gods. The nocturnal experiences described in the poem is rich with extraordinary poetic embellishments and Indian imagination of female snake gods and some human snake forms. We understand how Indian mythology takes the shape of poetry through Lakshmi Kannan. And when we read Lakshmi Kannan's Nadi Stuti, after the day's toil or after the day's turbulence, mental turbulence, we become something very different through knowing, returning to myths, returning to legend, returning to past as a method to heal the heart also. Let me quote two lines from Nadi Stuti. A red dot shining on its brow, mother watched fascinated, yet fearful. Now actually nowadays, Lakshmi Kannan is living in Delhi, and from Delhi, Tamil born, Delhi settled to Kerala. Krishna and other poems by Gopi Kuttur. Krishna and other poems reflect the confidence and strength of a contemporary Indian English poet who can express Indian myths and legends in a powerful style, embellished with ease and effortlessness. Why do I stress on Indian English poetry in relation with the powerful use of myths and legends? Because this is one parameter that determines my Indianness, my roots, and my identity. Award-winning poet Guppy Kuttu started writing poetry at the age very early, and for him, a good poem is one that enters one's soul. That is crucial. If it stops physically, if it cannot enter into the soul, I think the role of poetry is disturbed. And and Guppy Kuttu says, good poem should enter into a soul, makes its mark there, and continues to haunt the reader. Now look at the phrases that he uses. Enters the soul and makes a mark there and continues to haunt the reader, hungry to read it again and again. It's like addiction. And when if you grow up addiction for reading poetry, hungry for reading poetry, I think your diversion has taken place already, and your wellness is almost a journey is complete. There are, of course, many ways to enter or touch one's mind or soul. The beauty, love, statement, imagery, mystery, surprise, and so more. We never know which door will open when. And for a troubled heart, there is always a constant search for something. And when that heart gets something, a door or a ventilator, a window, I think it's time that fresh air should come in. Now, Guppy Kuttur's very interesting collection I refer already, and the myth of Krishna. Myth of Krishna is something that most of the Indians we are aware of. And Guppy Kuttur has made a deep impression as a poet. And, through the use of images, symbols, and myths. And he makes Krishna as a handsome lover, the calm, smiling, perfect blue Lord. Let me read two lines from his poem called Krishna, the titular poem. When we came home, we hug him on the wall. And look how very commonplace way he can a poet can hug Krishna like a common man, as a man who will relieve from all pain and anguish and bitterness of life. The conversational style of these lines makes Krishna a home god, familiar to us. That means approximation to life as life is. And this presentation, what we can relate to, is a kind of understanding which will lead to the emotional bondage or mutual emotional intelligence in a later stage. Let me read another four lines from Krishna. For years he was not found, and one day, after the property partition, I found him. How interestingly used. After the property partition, I found him again. These are very important sociological things that has happened. The partition of property in a joint family. From myth as a tool for emotional intelligence. Reading myth is to be intelligent emotionally, culturally. And from that, let me go directly to the mind part. And Indian English poetry is now so sound, vibrant with playing with the mind and with the cadence that is like a balm, that is like a therapy. And there lies the mastery of Indian English poetry. You know, mind is very difficult thing to know. We never know. We don't have any barometer to see, check how much we can penetrate into mind. But Indian English poetry in recent times, in last 20 years, have made miracles. And I will be able to cover all of them. I will cover some of the poets whom reading, I think if we can read them, I think we become a kind of, we are hungry to read again. And we read like, you know, we are watching some magic in front of us. And the magic is happening at the mind. And we are totally oblivious of the world. And the first person I would recommend is, of course, the Kotak-born poet Bibhu Padhi, a seasoned poet. I think many of us who are attending in today's discussion are not familiar with Bibhu Padhi. You know, he was a professor of English in Odisha government colleges, and he has some miraculous and I will say magical contribution to poetry. But if you invite Bibhu Padhi for Vibhuda for a conference, seminar, or a talk, you will never attend. He declined many titles, and you know he wants to live a life of his own, and that's why I think Bibhu Padhi is not much known, but he should be, and he should have been. A seasoned poet, Bibhu Padhi, I refer to a couple of collections only because of the shortage of time. The sixth collection, of course, sixth collection, A Friendship with Time. The collection called A Friendship with Time. I think if you can Google, I think many reviews will come up, and which uplifts whatever it limbs. It turns the trivial into the exalted and sublime. He cannot rest until he translates whatever moves him into poems. Very, difficult poet to get in. For Padhi, anything that agitates, consoles, ignites, uplifts, electrifies, and liberates constitutes poetry. There are some interviews you can read available on internet on Bibhu Padhi, and of course many poems which are available on internet. Here is a poet who enters into the home of thoughts unbidden, without ringing the doorbell. You will suddenly you get a copy of Bibhu Padhi's collection or read Bibhu Padhi's poetry, and you don't feel like that someone is forcing you to read. You get it and you become addicted to reading Bibhu Padhi. One of them is, of course, myself. Readers take a trip down memory lane and relive the old memories and moments again. Padhi strives to bring to surface what lies in his subconscious. History records what occurred. Poetry sometimes what might be. That's why poetry has been defined as a divine ecstasy. To spin a thought's wing, waiting is a kind of suspended animation. It is a stock currency of life. We wait for the rains before we can plow. Poet Padhi universalizes the state of waiting. Let me read out 3 lines from his poem entitled An Ordinary Day. This is the time I wait for throughout the year, for sleep, further sleep. Some things keep happening in the poet's mind. and Padi lives through the pain and waits for rain to restore ease faithfully. Read quote, I am enclosed by the superstitious safety of my home, and I wish I were out in the rains. I wish I were out in the rains. If an agitated mind can ever think of this wish, I wish I were out in the rain, I think the heart is healed. Poetry is a search of identity, identity of different parameters. What am I? At times ontological, at times cultural, at times sociological, political, and return to the self, as return to nature and return to self, are very important facets of reading the self. And reflection of the self is a process of facing another self and building up communion with the fellow people and the community. And when the spirit of community, the feeling of community feeling grows up, I think that is the best part of the communication between the poet and the world, or the reader and the world. One such poet, I think many of us who are present here, and many of you who are know, then you know, Rabin S. Angam. Rabin was born in Manipur, and his books of poetry are many. I think started with 1988, Words and the Silence, and a very important, significant voice from the Northeast, from India. I think Ravin's poetry will always engage you. Look what I'm going to recite for a few lines from Ravin's poem, A Poem for Mother. Mother who gave birth to me, Palem Apoki. To be a man, how I hated. Leaving home 10 years ago, now these hills have grown on me. I turn out to be a small man with small dreams, living a small life. Feeling smallness, relating to the world is one of the expressions and one of the realizations through poetry, like visiting the hills. The hills are so tall and I'm so teeny a person. I think very important measure for the kind of a step towards wellness of the heart. Another poet, I think all of you, I think some of you may know, and many of you may not know, but she is a very promising writer from Nagaland. T. Keditsu, Keditsu. Keditsu. Keditsu is a feminist poet, academic writer, educator. She advocates the revival of indigenous Naga textiles and women's narratives. Look at her involvements. And T. Keditsu's poems prick us where it hurts most. In the deep confines of experiences, stocked into the storage unit called silence. And it's so elegant that we are overwhelmed by the power of poetry, power of music. Let me read out 3 lines from her very important poem called The Naga Republic. My rivers torn from the riverbeds and cast out to run rampant through frightened forests, fleeing into the fringed incoherence. And as if when we read her poetry, as if the entire part of the territory, entire cultural nuances come to the forefront. Now, another dimension we will discuss on wellness and poetry, and that is possible because of the growth of Indian poetry or Indian English, and making Indian English as the poet's own language of expression to perfection. And this perfection is very difficult. And of course, many of us can write brilliant prose, but but some of us can write like so magically, and which is not only a narrative or something which reads like poetry, but somewhere the lack of something is missing. But there are some poets from in India now who are aesthetically at the best, who will involve you aesthetically, and who will you cannot, and once you read one collection, you will be tempted to read the second collection because you are already tuned into that aesthetics of life. Let me refer to a very recent book published by Red River. That is a Blood of a Woman by Vasudhara Roy. And that is possibly there is no ailment, just the weather. The comment is there is no ailment, just the weather in the poem Dukkha. As we whisker from one page to another page of this collection, we get into the sunshine of the heart. It takes no time to get our bearings in full. Vasudhara writes and expresses feelings fiercely, tenderly, honestly, and contemplatively. Over these years, Vasudhara has evolved her own style of poetry writing, which is never loud, never head on, tender. I'm not giving up this light. Look, I just scissored your coat, my last truce with light from beyond morning. Her liberal feminism works within a liberal democracy to enact socialism through poetry that is not a manifesto or slogan. Poetry as aesthetics. Her poetry will never give you an impression that poetry is written with a slogan or a manifesto or some kind of objectives. Here is a poet. She is not a confessional or half confessional like many of her contemporary poets. That is another rarity. A firm believer in the therapeutic power of verse, Vasudhara is one of these rare poets for whom our eager ears wait. Writing is magic. Vasudhara is gifted with. Now, if we think of Indian English poetry, call it Kashi Prasad Ghosh or call it Dirogio, whoever is the founder of Indian English poetry, because of Dirogio's mixed parentage, if we call Kashi Prasad Ghosh as the first Indian English poet, Kashi Prasad Ghosh or Dirogio to Vasudhara Roy, Indian English poetry has walked a long way. Vasudhara concentrates and centers her poetry around a soul space, letting us know how she walks into poetry through successes and failures, gaze from otherness of wisdom. That is a very perspective-wise, very different kind of poetry. And what is interesting is the selection of words, magical. The title of this collection may smell like a blur of a woman, smell like political. Her descriptions of domestic chores are vivid and honest. Let me read out 3 lines from her poem called Chores. A child's pockets must be emptied of pebbles each day. Broken glass has to be swept aside. loose threads cut, nails pared. Now, many of, I think, mothers are here, and I being the father. This is the daily chore we do for the children, and how beautifully she has captured it through a magical power of words. Poetry of Vasudhara is great Pablo Neruda is about the truth of a moment. It can come from any moment, and it can become something very important for poetry. Let me read out another 2-3 lines from our poem, Women at Twilight. She forgets how many laws she has upheld, or how many goodbyes she has said. Imagine a 9-year sari whose wholeness could have been a forest speaking to the earth body, now scissored willfully into rags, each random rag assigned a task to the hatch. From the poem, How I Give Myself Away. Now, what is important about Vasudhara's poetry is something, the language through which, the mastery of language of Indian English poetry. Let me read out what Jaydeep Prasad writes about Vasudhara's collection called Stitching a Home. Professor Jaydeep Prasad writes, Roy's poems draw you in to see from a different point of view the construction of home and the transactions of relationships. From Stitching a Home by Vasudhara Roy, and a very interesting comment endorsement by none other than Keki Daruwala. He says, the poet tells us places have souls too, and you have to let them settle. Keki says, the poet tells us places have souls too, and you have to let them settle. Let me read out one whole poem from Vasudhara's Stitching a Home, and witness how poetry can be therapeutic and art to embrace for wellness. The title of the poem is Losing God. Under the gazing, resplendent surface of your bronze, I sight flashes of human flesh, vulnerable, bleeding, torn. The initiation leaves a wound yearning forever, for in losing a God, much more than love is lost. Walled around the heart, the universe's infinity, a walnut rotting from without to within. Losing God, what else can be owned? I have no answer. I offer my faith to the wind, hoping something may be found in the scattering. I don't know how did I do justice to reading the poem, but I say I recommend strongly reading Vasudhara's poetry every day. Next is another amazing poet that we are going to talk about, and no Indian English poetry can be complete without referring to Mamang Dai. And she is one of the first and the finest, writers writing from the great Indian Northeast. Born in Pushighat in Arunachal Pradesh. In this connection, there is a book, prose writing from the Northeast, India, and that is edited by myself and Malashami Jacob, and where she has an article about her route, Pushighat, and her community. Very interesting to read that if we really research on and relate to Mamang Dai. From Arunachal Pradesh, she describes the land, and of course, we are all aware of that, the land of the rising sun. And she is famous for many very epoch-making poems, the poems which will stay. Poems you lose every day. We read a lot of poems every day and lose, but some poems really stay. And here is one poem like that, and many of our universities we teach Mamangdai, small towns and the rivers. Small towns always remind me of death. My hometown lies calmly amidst the trees. It is always the same in summer or winter, with the dust flying or the wind hollowing down the gorge. In small towns by the river, we all want to walk with the gods. Mamangdai's poetry is something very much rooted to the land. And when we read Mamangdai, we have an inclination to know about the spaces that she wants to intervene. I think space to space communion is an important parameter and the hallmark of building up identity. And once identity is found, concrete, concentrated, I think wellness is established. From Mamangdai of the Northeast to let me return to another very important, significant poet born in Kerala but now settled in Delhi, Smita Sehgal. And many of you present here, I think, must be knowing Smita Sehgal and her very important collection, How Women Become Poems in Malabar. How Women Become Poems in Malabar. The title itself signifies some of the very important signals and some very important pretexts to read this collection. How Women Become Poems in Malabar by Smita Sehgal lyrically reveals the feminine experience, the transformation of the self, and the setting of the coast of the Malabar and the context background of poetry. Let me read out one of her poems, Humayun's Tomb. I think all of us who have visited Humayun's tomb will be relating to it. In the shadows of her womb quivers lust of the dynasty, the one who never forgot to gather verses in the summer of exile. Now, once we read the poem of history, and that is palpable, and that is very much, of course, we can think that our mind is also diverted into, that will say positively diverted into the vibes. The vibes and the vibes are very much part of the culture of wellness or the mental wellness that we talk of. From Malabar to Georgetown, West Indies, because she has several references to the West Indies. We all know West Indies for cricket. But if you read Smita's this collection, because she lived there for some years, I think, and there were so many expressions to West Indies. From Malabar coast to Georgetown and Port of Spain, and to Kabul, poetry is the only language she trusts. And in the poem Mahalaya, she says, in the tenor voice of yours, you ask, why hadn't I let you know I am coming? I know I am home. Again, I repeat, in the tenor voice of yours, you ask, why hadn't I let you know I am coming? I know I am home. How powerful. Now, when we talk of poetry, poetry is something that is so crucial for all of us to read and to relieve our mental stress and embrace wellness. I know this is some may think who are not into poetry, that how can poetry make such miracle? Yes, the power of poetry is magical, and some kind of sounds that, as we all know, if we listen to some songs, we become sad. If we listen to some songs, we become jubilant. And if we listen to some kind of soulful songs, some and depressions, we are out of depression. So all because of the power and the selection of words, consonantal sounds, use of liquid consonantal sounds, use of the words which are related to the emotions of that. And some poets know the trick of using that and a command over the language so much that they can use it effectively, easily, and the readers are almost tempted to read them again and again and again. I'll refer to one of my poems from my last collection, The Harp Confession, published last year. Wheels of Stone. The title of the poem is Wheels of Stone. Writes in stone, forgotten Kulingo kings, carved spells of mystic light, piercing airy life carvings. Through the ancient stones where the noon retires, a spectral embrace by each carve of the wheel, all lighted. Silent stone horses' wheels, the chariot temple emerge from the depths of the sand of the blue sea, carrying the sun god. Konaraka stands, stones stand as deep as time gyre in full, figuring courtship and intimacy. Erotic mudra forms linking lives, freezing in time. Time's fairy makes her mark on these desirous stones. In stories deeps, where moments fear and tears roll, the early rays play in between the hard stones. The sun rides on time's big life wheels. It is, of course, dedicated to the Konaraka Sun Temple. Many of us already have visited. No, those who are brought up in the eastern part of India and write some kind of poetry, poems, and academic as well. The influence of Jayanta Mahapatra is unforgettable. So the poem I'm going to recite is in memory of Jayanta Mahapatra after his sad demise. The title of the poem is The Sun Moments. I stand in front of your floral gate, surrounded by green hopes, crow noises, before the wearing banks of the Mahanadi. I have the twilight of the metaphors behind, passing through a rain of rites, with slow, soundless night at Kotak. The Hirakund Dam is never dry. The substance steers my grandfather hanging over an ancient city of temples. As an obscure man, I ask for words. Out of hunger or a summer poem, looking out for some drops of holy water from somewhere. My brown, fresh flesh is a missing person with a bare flesh of relationships, lying down with the wounds licking blood. Tonight, I am beside the chariot and the lion sitting, counting shadow spaces at Chandrabhaga beach. Without talking to it, my random descent begins. Life signs are white bones today. If I lose all doors of paper, how can I talk to my God? This was my humble submission at the lotus feet of Jayantada after his sad demise. Now, what I have been discussing about, say, for 70, 75 minutes time, like that. Even though Indian English poetry is going through its healthiest and the richest phase so far, it needs an able and discursive body of critical discourse to sustain serious attention as a genre. It needs to be taught more enthusiastically in literature classrooms for its full potential to be examined and sensitized. This is very important because when we pass through depression, we don't tend to return to poetry because we are never taught poetry enthusiastically. There are some exceptions. There are some exceptional teachers who dramatize, perform poetry, who madly been akin to poetry, attached with poetry, lived with poetry, and converted a generation, turned a generation into poetry. What my point is that it needs to be taught more enthusiastically in literature classrooms at the very formative stage of life. Say for even in plus two or in the graduation, post graduation, that no poetry of life will determine how poetry is performed.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor
And-
Sarangi.
Yes.
I mean, I was so engrossed in your lecture, didn't see, but our participants want to interact with you. They have posted
Yeah,
some.
I'll put it in 2 3 minutes. 2 minutes, just
Yeah,
2 minutes.
yes.
2 minutes. As I consider criticism or any form of art, I consider any form of art is a part of activism. The purpose is to critically engage, mentally engage with poetry, so to offer to it good health and sustainability. And that is vice versa. That is very much mutual. And the rich mosaic of Indian English poetry that we are talking now is one of the most vibrant genres of the world now. And poets are asked to edit, guest edit English poetry journals in prominent places abroad. And Indian English poetry poets have grown a tremendous confidence and command over the medium. That is, I think, the hallmark in the development in this particular field. Schools and college goers are writing wonderful generation of poetry, wonderful poetry, and that is another very important facet relating to it. So what I mean to say is here is that uh, the musicality, the nuances, the parameters that we covered are very much part of a part of interface with the heart or the soul spaces, and which are very important for nurturing or daily nurturing, daily cultivation for making a sound, strong body and mind, and which will be mentally very sound as well and physically sound. And poetry is very important part of art, aesthetic, and that builds up the man as a man. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to questions as Madam is saying. But I think this could go on for some more hours because this is just a fraction.
And I won't mind, and none of our participants won't mind that.
Yeah.
But this
So
is a
like that.
wonderful opportunity for our participants to have a sort of an interaction with you and get their
Yes,
questions
sure.
on. And before that, I need to thank you profusely for the wonderful exposition of the topic, poetry and the aesthetics of wellness embedded in it. Thank you, Professor Sarangi. You were so thorough and comprehensive, and you gave us a wide and very realistic portrayal of the contemporary scenario in terms of Indian English poetry and poetry in vernaculars, paying equal importance to both the streams. I mean, all the streams. As in India, we believe in diversity, we believe in proliferation. So that was a wonderful experience. In fact, haven't heard to such a detailed conversation on poetry, contemporary poetry in India, in the longest time. So it was all worth our time. We have learned a lot. Now, looking at the questions, I can see that
The
people.
feelings are mutual. So, yeah. Can we take up some questions?
Yes. I'm just going through the questions. The first question is from Charu Vaid, and she is asking, sir, is Indian English poetry more cathartic to Indians than, say, British poetry?
It's very difficult to say because, Western music is also part and the Indian music, there is no difference. And it covers all the emotions we have. So we cannot categorically differentiate. But for Indians, you can relate. The added advantage is that you can relate with the situation. And that is the thing I will say. But both have the same cathartic power, isn't it? As we all have understood when we were students, isn't it? So
And the
watching
thing of,
any
and the
poetry.
thing of beauty is a joy forever, as Keats would say.
Absolutely. But
Yeah,
I would recommend strongly everyone to read at least a few poems every day. And that cultivate this art, day after day, month after month, year after month. And you will be reading Neruda, you will be reading Safaris, you will be reading Quasimodo, translations and different Indian poets translated into English from Australia, Eddie Hope, and anybody from New Zealand. So whatever. And then you build up a passion for it, madness for it. Unless the madness is there, I think the maximum amount degree of madness increases. If the degree of madness increases, there is less possibility of your depression.
exactly. And for years, we have taken refuge in Wordsworth's, Coleridge's poetry, Keats's poetry. Still now, till this date, people listen to Beethoven's music. So, and we know that Indian English is popular, Indian literature is universally popular, and people are, reading and appreciating and learning.
Another thing is, Madam Jay, the thing is the energy of a teacher is very important. Because who will initiate poetry into, in a classroom, that is very important. How you are initiated to the madness, madness of either for lead to creativity.
So, Dr. Trilochan Jaina would like to ask, poetry is the expression of the feeling of a poetry. How does it impact the life of diverse people with diverse interests?
Which one, please?
This is
yeah.
So I think
Of
we have
course, poetry is a
covered
part
this.
of feelings. As we mentioned, several parameters, cultural, whatever. If it can hit the feelings, you are mentally relieved because we are talking about stress, trauma in a day when we are talking, everything is violent. So only a calm, soothing place is music and any kind of art, and poetry is a part of art. And for any art, there is one-to-one communion with the soul. And if your soul is busy with calmness, quietness, it's not loud, it's not head on, it's soothing. Like, now you will fall like, let me read another one. Let me read another. You should be hungry for reading. Another one. Like that. If you read Bibhu Padi's poetry, I think poem after poem, you will be madly addicted towards reading that. Like Pablo Neruda. If you read Neruda in original Spanish, you will be mad. You cannot spend an evening without reading Neruda. If there are people I know who go to the ghats of the Ganges and read every day Tagore's poems in Kolkata. Every day they go to the ghat and read Tagore's poems in a group and like that. They cannot, even in rain, storm, whatever may happen. It's like something that you cannot forget. That's a temptation within, or Mahapatra said, movement within.
Okay, moving on to the next question, sir. Dr. Vikas Sharma wants to ask, who is the most eligible Indian English poet of recent times who can be studied for taking motivation for writing?
I'm not going into any name.
Yeah, to
There
take.
are many names. In my talk, only 190 minutes talk, I could mention some, but India is a huge country, and due to the limitation of time, but I would recommend read all first. Some will touch you. Then you will be moved by some. Then you will be tempted to read again. Yeah.
Yeah, for different kind of poetic experience, I think we need to read different poets. Their own subjective ideas, opinions would help us recover and rejuvenate and also, explore our own selves. So this is Dr. Keshri Nandan Sharma, who wants to know if someone is in depression, how he or she will be interested in any poetry.
Poetry is a big, prose is of course, poetry is a big healer. You read Lorca, you read, start reading, even translations, I think, which are very important for all of us. And that will give us an access to reach out the soul spaces. So poetry is like music, which has an immediate effect.
Yeah, so all of the participants are thanking you profusely for the wonderful session.
Thank you.
They have thoroughly enjoyed
I
it.
have only one wish, that all of you will be living and longing for poetry. Every time, every day, you will read poetry, because poetry is really is a superpower to the soul making,
With your
Thank
words,
you for interacting with us.
with your
Thank you
words
so
of
much.
wisdom, sir, I take this moment to extend a vote of thanks to you, particularly for giving us such valuable takeaways. And you have also taught us as how poetry as therapy can help us to re-engage with our potential to build, to create, and imagine the most pleasurable sights and experiences. And undoubtedly, poetry, like other arts, is a form of nourishment. In the words of Susan Sontag, I have always believed that it's a kind of a nourishment. It helps us in isolation. It helps us when we are with people, listening to poetry, writing poetry, reciting poetry, all of that, all of these activities related to poetry, they help people come out of their cocoon, deal with their limitations, with their problems, with their issues. And of course, they turn out to be, important messengers to the world, the way they engage with the world and the world. So with this, I thank you profusely once again, Professor Sarangi, for taking time out for doing this session with us.
Thank you so much to the entire team of yours. Thank you.
I'm also,
and administration.
I'm also thanking my professor, Honorable Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jhaji, for providing us this wonderful opportunity for collaborative learning. I'm grateful to the conveners of this refresher course committee, Professor Vinita Tuli, who is also our IQAC convener, and Professor Anjali Gupta for leading the committee so well, guiding us well, and the technical team, Mr. Vikram, and all the dear participants for staying involved and engaged and patiently hearing and learning. So with this, I bring this session to a close, and we have to meet again. We have to reassemble again at 2 o'clock. 2:30?
At 2:30. At
2:30.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's it for now, and we hope to meet again.